Hi to everyone, Serge Fdida speaking, and I would like to join Thanasis to welcome you all. It gives us great pleasure to have you in presence for most, and some of you, of course, being remotely connected. It has been quite some time that we could not organize events on behalf of Slices, as an example. To bring the community all together and to discuss. So the objective of the summer school is really to discuss, to question, to really discuss within the presentation, but also outside. We have a very wonderful environment, and we can continue the discussion in the evening and whenever you want. So the remote works? Yeah, okay, excellent. Okay. So this event is brought to you by Slices. So I would take some time just to give a short introduction about what is Slices as a really important development for the European community involved in digital infrastructures, and especially with respect to those platforms. So as you know, part of the community has been involved since decades on building what we call test beds, facilities in order to support the research. Because in order to make your assumptions and demonstrate the validity of your results, you need different kind of tools, ranging from simulation to emulation. And what we focus within Slices are those test platforms. And there has been a lot of developments. I will not mention them, but in the past, important facilities that have been successfully used by the community. And you see on the right-hand side, different new initiatives developed in the US, and Manu will certainly touch base on this after me. And others, of course, have been developed, for instance, in Asia. And in Europe, there are also different types of platforms that have been supported mostly by the European programs. This being said, and that's my personal statement, I believe that those and most of those platforms have been successful. If you look at the impact assessment with respect to the number of users, number of experiments, training, different kind of activities, but they are not recognized as much as they should for different reasons, and eventually that will be part of the discussion later. And most importantly, they are not sustainable, even in the US, Manu, meaning that they got funding for a couple of years and then they need to ask for funding to sustain them. But with respect to the type of funding, you cannot claim that this is a continuation. You have to argue that this is something new that will leverage what has been done in the past. And honestly, this is really difficult. And we need to change the narrative. That was exactly the purpose of Slices. You need to change the narrative to look for large-scale funding, which is science-driven instruments. And this is what we started back in 2017. And we said, let's look at those large-scale funding that other communities are using, like telescopes. Okay? And we're very happy that we were successful in a quite short time, because normally to enter into the roadmap of those large-scale funding instruments, you need 5 to 10 years. So we're very happy to say that last year, a year ago in July, we were accepted to enter into the S3 roadmap with other scientific instruments from other domains. We were the first one in digital science. It never happened before. So it gives us a lot of responsibility. So those are scientific instruments in astronomy, in high energy physics, even in social sciences, you will find some, but none in digital sciences, because often it was considered that actually the digital infrastructures are used by e-sciences for their own purpose, but not for the research in digital infrastructures. So research infrastructure as a scientific instrument is exactly the target of SLICES. What is of utmost importance is to understand that SLICES is first and foremost a vibrant community. And part of this community is here, or accessing remotely, or not participating today. But as you can see here, SLICES today is organized through 15 European member states. And we receive the political support, so the engagement of the stakeholders from 12 European member states. So it's already a strong commitment. Of course, what is important for us is to get the support of the people through the organization. So we got support from a lot of universities, but also from industry, from research networks, and as I will say a bit later, it's an international development, so we got strong support from other initiatives worldwide. We have a strong identity because what we want to do is to build a scientific instrument to support the research in digital infrastructures. And there are a lot of challenges, of course. I mean, we are very ambitious, which creates a lot of important challenges ahead of us because nobody did it in the past. What was important for us is to aggregate different communities, those dealing with IoT, with 5G, beyond 5G and 6G, with cloud, with HPC, name it. And we know that those communities have been quite fragmented in the past, but still, they are now facing similar scientific challenges. So what we want to build is fully controllable, programmable, virtualized platforms. And openness is really the core of the platform. Of course, we would like this platform to be inclusive. So the partnership that I mentioned a bit earlier is not closed. New participants can join, new institutions can join. So I'm very happy to say that, for instance, we got the interest from Ireland to join as a member. And of course, other countries are welcome to join. So it's a sustainable facility. Of course, the funding of S3 is not like you got a couple of 100 millions and then you can move forward. It's a joint investment strategy between the European Commission and the member states. So the funding has to come from the member states to support the infrastructure of the nodes and the Commission to support the organization of the overall infrastructure. So it's a sustainable facility because it is the first time we can present how the facility will evolve until, as you will eventually see, 2042. And we are following the phases of S3. So you start with the design phase where you design the infrastructure, this ambition, the mission, the technology, and so on. And then you move into the preparation phase. So we just are now getting out of the design space. We successfully validated all the minimum key requirements of the design phase according to S3. And we will have the kickoff of the preparation phase in September. And as you can see, after the preparation phase, we'll move into the implementation phase. So again, think about the telescope. The first question is, what is the scientific challenge that you want to address? I used to say it's easier for the domain because they said, does the Higgs boson exist? Does it exist? They demonstrated that it exists thanks to an instrument that they have launched a couple of years ago. So for us, they challenge us about what are the scientific questions that we want to address. And then if they are convinced that those questions exist, they challenge us about, can you design such an instrument? So we define most of the design. And now we are going to move into the preparation, so where we put all the pieces together, and then you move into the implementation, and then the operation. But as we don't design a telescope, we can do it gradually, meaning that we can open service before the full infrastructure has been deployed. Okay. So we have different projects to do that. Slices DS is a project funded by the Commission to support the design. Is going to close this August, and we have another project which is named Slices SC, which basically is funding this summer school as an example to build the community. And we have Slices PP that is starting in September. The other thing which is important is that because Slices is now on the S3 roadmap, which is a label of quality, of excellence, it's easier for the national nodes to get funding. So I put a few numbers here. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I try to give some estimate, but for instance, in Italy, you got 5.6 million because this will help you to build the Italian Slices node. Okay? And directly or indirectly, in other countries now, because of Slices being on the roadmap, you can get easier funding to support the national nodes. So what is important is to understand that because Slices is on the S3 roadmap, it's much easier now to get funding for the national nodes. So I'll go very quickly on this. The other thing which is interesting is that those big instruments, they need to have their own governance. So meaning that there will be a legal entity that will be defined and set up so that it could orchestrate the development of the instruments. For instance, we will be able to hire people directly to support the instrument and not necessarily only through the different organizations. So for those who know how it works in Europe, this is the case for the EIT or for the big flagship, they have their own legal entity. This will happen, hopefully, within the next 2 years, so that there will be a central governance and a central legal entity with respect to Slices. So I'm going to skip this because it's not so important. So then, of course, what is really critical is the impact assessment. What is the value of what we are going to do with Slices? How this is going to serve the community? And there are a lot of debates now about how well the public funding is used and how we can evaluate the impact of such a development. So for instance, how many papers are referring to Slices, which doesn't exist yet, but this was the case for other testbeds. How many papers have been referring to Planet Lab or to the NITOS testbed or to Cosmos? How many experimenters, how many experiments, how many students have been trained, how many curricula have been using. So those are very important, and it's important for us to understand how we are going to be evaluated. Of course, it's a real challenge. When we present Slices, we always have this type of questions. How are you going to do it? It's impossible because the technology is evolving, because the wireless community has different perspective as the cloud community. Yes, of course, but if you want to look for large-scale funding, you have to be ambitious and you need to bring a global community altogether. The competition is very strong. I mean, look at the papers that are published in high-quality conferences like SIGCOMM, and you will see that more and more of those papers are coming from the tech giants. And one reason is that, of course, they benefit from large-scale instruments. They can deploy a new protocol, they can collect the data, and they can publish the paper. Of course, nobody is going to check whether this is true or not, because nobody has access to the data. This is a real problem for a scientific community. When we were discussing with other scientific communities to convince them about the rationale of Slices, even if they didn't really understand what are the scientific questions that we address, what they understand is that if we cannot validate or provide evidence about the result that we produce, we are not a scientific community. And there are papers that are published in our community that cannot be published in other communities because there is no reproducibility. So when you talk to S3, what is important, what matters, is not only the infrastructure that you build, it is that you need to support the full research lifecycle. So you need to be able to collect the data, to make the data available. If you design software components, digital objects, you need to make them available to the community as well so that they can reproduce the data. Also that you can compare your data with the state of the art. And I'm sure that you all try to do it in the past. And certainly you witness that often it's really hard. Okay? So we believe we have a unique opportunity because we have been deploying testbed in the past. Of course, we don't have the scale to engage a huge amount of resources to build the components and to maintain them. But now, with those initiatives that you see here, and like we have Raymond here with Open Air Interface as an example, now we can really benefit eventually from those open source developments to build the infrastructure and to make it sustainable. And this is something that we want to leverage in Slices very clearly. So international cooperation is key because we found this S3 framework in Europe to make the European component sustainable, but of course we need to align with what our colleagues are doing in the US and eventually elsewhere. So for instance, Japan, Brazil, China is becoming a little bit more difficult these days. So of course, we have to identify what are the scientific questions. I'm not going into details here, but we did some analysis in Slices. Lately, you had the ATIS white paper on the roadmap. You had the Empower white paper on the roadmap towards 6G. So you can see what are the main challenges and how we can prepare the infrastructure to support the research in those domains. Of course, that's really, really important to continue to monitor this. But what we believe is that the most important transformation of the domain is through softwareization. And we believe that we can prepare the softwareization of the infrastructure even today for the future development, so beyond 5G and 6G. Last, again, the responsibility that we have is not only with building the infrastructure, it's also with respect to the full research lifecycle. So reproducibility being, of course, one of the most important components. And in Slices, we have to deal with the articulation with the European Open Science Cloud, which in a nutshell is very ambitious because it is positioning itself as the repository for all research data that is produced in Europe. And what we would like to do, of course, is to contribute to EOSC through the data that are either the data that are produced by Slices itself as an infrastructure or by the data that has been collected through the experiments, of course, as long as the experiments are willing to share the data. And it's not only about the data, it's also related to the software components. In a nutshell, we call them digital objects, and the idea is to share those digital objects. So what we would like to achieve, and I hope Manu will echo to this, is can we define a reference architecture for Slices? Meaning that, of course, we call for diversity. We are not claiming that a single solution will fit all needs, but we need to have a baseline architecture that could be deployed in many nodes. So in the French node, in the Greek node, in the Italian node, in the Spanish node, and hopefully, if we can think about this design jointly with our colleagues in the US, as an example, then this will really provide a much more powerful infrastructure to compete with those that I mentioned earlier. So that's basically the dream that we have. And if we are smart, if we can articulate the different developments through the problem of matching the funding in the US and Europe, for instance, we believe that we have a unique opportunity as a community. And this is why we decided to organize this summer school, because we would like to bring the community through this spirit of the transformation of the field through the softwareization. In SLICE, we'd like to build a SLICE's academy. So by academy, we mean that we reflect what are the skills that are necessary for those who we will train in order to understand what is such, because today you raise for not but being what is necessary to again make sure you so very difficult period to another period that is also a little bit complex. But it's good to see you all here. And again, we expect that you will be able to entertain as well. It's important to have very solid and technical discussion, but also to enjoy the environment. And I'm sure that this will be the case. And I would like to thank Thanasis, Stavroula, Nikos, and the whole team here because they are doing a wonderful job to host us in the best conditions. Thank you.